Adobe is making more money than ever. Record revenue, record profits, and yet the stock just hit an 8-year low. That's not the strange part. The strange part is this. The company that spent a decade making it nearly impossible for customers to leave just had to write a billion-dollar check to the competitor it couldn't buy. Not to regulators, not to a court. To Figma, the design startup Adobe tried to acquire, because the deal fell through and the contract said so. Adobe got hit with a cancellation fee. The same company the FTC described as burying its termination terms in small print, steering customers into year-long contracts they didn't fully understand, watching complaint after complaint pile up and doing nothing, just paid the ultimate irony. They built their empire on the cost of leaving. And then, in a single quarter, they had to pay it themselves. That's not a coincidence. That's the whole story. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why a company posting $6.4 billion in quarterly revenue is being priced by investors like it's slowly running out of road. To understand how Adobe got here, you need to understand what Adobe actually built. By the early 2010s, Adobe didn't just make popular software. They owned the entire creative stack. Photoshop defined what image editing was. Illustrator owned vector design. Premiere Pro was wired deep into commercial television and video production pipelines. Acrobat had turned the PDF into universal infrastructure, the format every industry used to send, sign, and file documents. For a working designer, photographer, editor, or marketer, not using Adobe wasn't a preference. It was a career constraint. Clients expected Adobe files. Employers assumed Adobe proficiency. The tools had become the industry standard so completely that choosing an alternative felt like showing up to a job site with the wrong equipment. Then in 2013, CEO Shantanu Narayan used that position. Adobe retired one-time software purchases. Everything moved to Creative Cloud, a monthly subscription bundling the entire portfolio. The pitch was reasonable. Pay less each month instead of several hundred upfront. Revenue began compounding almost immediately. By the mid-2020s, quarterly earnings were roughly 5 times what the company had pulled in a decade earlier. On paper, a clean win. But inside the model, something else was being constructed. Adobe didn't offer you 2 plans. They offered 3. A month-to-month option, most expensive. An annual plan billed upfront, cheapest. And right between them, priced to catch the eye. The annual plan billed monthly. Cheaper than flexible, less friction than paying the whole year. The obvious middle ground, the one most people chose. Here's what it actually was. A 12-month legal commitment, charged in monthly installments. Cancel early, and Adobe's terms kicked in. 50% of every remaining month on the contract, owed immediately. Not a 1-month penalty. Half of everything left on the clock. Want to turn off auto-renewal? Adobe didn't offer that. The only way to stop the plan from renewing was to cancel it, which triggered the fee. The FTC eventually documented this in detail. Disclosures buried in fine print. Key terms accessible only by hovering over small icons. Cancellation flows that obscured the financial consequence until the moment it applied. The agency found Adobe had watched years of complaints pile up on forums and consumer boards, and continued steering users toward that plan anyway. The same story on repeat. Users charged after cancelling. Cards billed multiple times. Customer service that didn't answer. The only reliable escape route, from what users reported, was cancelling their credit card entirely. The FTC settlement landed at $150 million, split between penalties and credits for affected customers. Adobe admitted no wrongdoing. But they agreed to one thing, disclosing subscription terms upfront going forward. That was the ask. Explain what the customer is signing up for. That's the concession. While the FTC case was building, Adobe was making what it believed was its most important strategic move in years. And it would backfire spectacularly. Figma was a browser-based design tool. No install required. Real-time collaboration. a free tier generous enough that serious professional work happened inside it. For product designers and UX teams, the people building the interfaces of the entire software economy, it had spread fast. Adobe announced a $20 billion acquisition in September 2022. You don't pay $20 billion for current revenue. You pay it to eliminate a threat before it matures. Adobe had absorbed competitors before. Design tools bought and quietly redirected. That was the playbook. Figma was the credible alternative Adobe's users kept gravitating toward, and the offer was an attempt to close that door. But the door wouldn't close. The UK's Competition and Markets Authority opened a formal investigation, publishing preliminary findings that the merger would damage innovation across the design software sector. The European Commission followed with parallel concerns. Adobe and Figma terminated the deal in December 2023. The reverse breakup fee, a standard contractual clause protecting the smaller party when an acquirer exits, was set at $1 billion. Adobe paid Figma $1 billion to walk away. The company that trapped customers had been trapped by a contract, and that $1 billion landed directly on Figma's balance sheet, meaning Adobe's failed acquisition funded its biggest competitor's next phase of growth. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. After the Figma fallout, after the $150 million settlement, after the CEO who built Creative Cloud announced his departure without a named successor in place, Adobe kept posting record numbers. In Q1 of fiscal year 2026, $6.4 billion in revenue, up 12% year over year. Operating income of $2.42 billion. Document Cloud, Acrobat, and PDF workflows, up 17% alone. The revenue line is fine. The stock isn't. Adobe is down roughly 70% from its peak. 8-year low. The PE ratio, that's price to earnings, the multiple investors are willing to pay for each dollar of profit, sitting around 14. For a high-margin software company that used to be priced as a compounding growth asset, a PE of 14 means the market has stopped believing in the future the same way it once did. The reason is AI. But not in the way Adobe hoped. In March 2023, Adobe launched Firefly, generative AI built directly into Creative Cloud. Text to image, generative fill-in Photoshop. Within the first year after beta, users generated 13 billion images. Adobe added a monetization layer on top, paying for AI outputs, stacked on top of subscriptions. Then came the Terms of Service update. Adobe revised its language in a way that appeared to grant itself broad rights to access and use content created in its tools. For studios operating under NDAs, film productions, advertising agencies, photographers with unreleased client work, this created real legal exposure. The backlash was fast and sharp. Adobe reversed the changes. But a reversal doesn't fix the underlying problem. To train competitive AI, you need data. To get data, you need access to user content. But Adobe's most valuable users, the professionals with the most sophisticated, most commercially sensitive work, are precisely the people with the strongest reasons not to share it. Adobe's AI ambitions and its highest value user base are structurally opposed. No policy update resolves that tension. Worse, AI is dismantling the moat from the outside. Adobe's pricing power worked because switching away required years of relearning. Photoshop muscle memory, Premiere Pro workflow knowledge, Illustrator-specific technique. That expertise barrier made users stay even when they were frustrated. And it let Adobe charge what it wanted. Generative AI compresses that. When a prompt can produce what once required deep tool knowledge, the switching cost falls. Canva and Figma are building AI into products that are already cheaper to enter. The comparison is no longer Adobe versus starting from scratch. It's Adobe versus something good enough, at a fraction of the price. That is a fundamentally different competitive reality. Shantanu Narayan spent 18 years at Adobe's helm. One analyst described the market's reaction to his departure plainly. Adobe had already been seen as being on the wrong side of the early AI transition. A leadership change with no clear succession plan deepened that view rather than resolved it. Here is the synthesis. Adobe's business model was built on one core assumption, that customers had no real choice. That assumption justified the subscription architecture, the hidden cancellation terms, the $20 billion attempt to buy out a competitor rather than compete with it. When the assumption held, it generated extraordinary returns. When it started to give way, when regulatory action removed the financial trap, when AI lowered the expertise barrier, when competitors built credible alternatives, what remained was a very profitable company with a compressing advantage. That's what the market is pricing, not the revenue, the assumption underneath it. Think of it as the captivity premium, a moat built not on product quality, but on the cost of leaving. Hidden contracts, cancellation fees, format lock-in, switching costs accumulated over years of professional use. For a decade, Adobe priced that captivity into every subscription tier. Three forces have arrived in the same window to dismantle it. Regulators removed the financial penalty. AI removed the expertise premium. Competitors removed the quality gap. Adobe still has the installed base. The revenue is real, but the company that existed because leaving was expensive is now a company where leaving is, for the first time in a long time, genuinely possible. DaVinci Resolve built its entire model around exactly that insight. Remove the switching cost, make the software free, let the quality do the work. From 100 users in 2009 to 5.4 million by 2023. Compound annual growth above 100%. Not because the marketing was better, because the trap wasn't there. The question was never whether Adobe survives. It's what Adobe is worth when captivity stops being part of the price. If you want to understand how DaVinci pulled that off, and why Adobe couldn't stop it, that story is next.